Chapter 9. The Affairs of Ants and Men. Still being doctored by a grim Jim Bell, it was a wan and sorry navvy ganger who several mornings later greeted me with a watery smile. Somewhat remorsefully, I strolled down to the council camp to inquire about the patient's recovery. Willingly he forgave me, but seeing I was quite relieved, the cunning old dodger immediately added a proviso. But you must write a poem, Jack. Don't look so flabbergasted. I know you've got it in you, and it's got to come out. Until it does, I'll still remember that stinking old he-goat with his whiskers massaging my face and knees in my stomach. It's still horrid sore. I won't forget those horns. They felt like the hammers of Thor when they butted my poor sore head. I won't forget the smell of that awful joke until you read out your poem by the council fire. Neither amusement nor laughter, nor the most earnest assurance that I had no more poetry in me than the man in the moon, would pacify old Mick. He was surprisingly serious. At last I promised, thinking he'd eventually get over it. Not he. So daily now, feeling like a silly ass, I climbed down the shaft to work to do penance, to try my hand most unwillingly as a rival poet to old Mick Moore's The Ganger. At each smoko I'd plug the candle into the face, pull out a grubby piece of paper and stub of pencil, and in the deathly quietness below by the old riverbed proceed to make myself feel a perfect ass. Thinking Garnet would help me out, I let him into the secret. Of course, he laughed as at a great joke. He was all for it. He would be. 2 poets in Nigger Creek, he declared enthusiastically. The muse of the navvy, the muse of the 10-scratcher. 1 Decla, the meeting of the waters, will become famous. Do you take me for a loon? I asked. No, he grinned, Shakespeare, and he refused point blank to scribble out a scrap of doggerel for me to read at the council fire. Dare try to bribe me again to such black treachery, he declared virtuously, and I'll tell old Mick, and every soul in Nigger Creek as well. That awful night came when I had to face the council, and they'd made sure it was a full council too, hardly daring to smirk at the expectant faces grinning round that bright fire. I mumbled through my first poem. I've got it beside me on the table in the old notes, but daren't insert it here. Instead of a tirade of disdain, the audience broke into congratulations. Of course they would. Old Mick's grizzled face was all wrinkled up in delight. Bravo, bravo, you must send that to the bulletin, lad. You must. Like hell I will, I thought. We never dreamt you had it in you, Jack. Garnet winked. 2 poets in Nigger Creek. Well, well, you can never judge a book by its cover, how true. Old Brooks and little Turley congratulated me warmly. Uneasily I glanced at the amused Jim Bell. 2 poets in Nigger Creek, he declared. 3 goats, and the one with the horns the most human of the lot. Of course Jim was howled down, but I certainly felt he was right. Old Mick had made a goat of me for sure. Served me right. Mick was very fond of birds, and in consequence the knowing little squabblers fairly took possession of his camp at times. He encouraged wild animals too, to Jim Bell's lurid exasperation when he found the possums had ripped open the flour bag or sugar bag and scattered the contents all over the place. Mick could always see the wonder and beauty in wildflowers too, so one day I called him down my shaft. "I'll show you 2 flowers you've never seen before, you old sinner. It'll be a pleasure, Jack." I held the light to a prop that was helping support the roof. That timber had been cut from a tree months ago. Just where it supported the roof leaked a steady drip of water, and the prop had begun to sprout. Ghostly white shoots were piercing out from all over it, away down there in the darkness, deep within the earth. "There you are, Mick, a stick of timber chopped down months ago. It has neither head, root, nor branches. It has not seen the sunlight which gives trees life. Since it was brought down here, a mutilated stick of timber, it should have been dead months ago, and yet it is bursting with life. It's a miracle, Jack." Mick smiled. "A miracle proving how everything clings to life. But after all, what is anything without life? I've seen the same thing in the timbers upon the very rock in railway tunnels. I might have known I couldn't surprise you. Well, you haven't seen this anyway." And I held the candle to a log in the face, deep set in among the gravels of the old river bed. It was a petrified log that had been born and grown into strength and beauty under heaven's sunlight ages ago. Torn down by some prehistoric storm, it had been finally washed down into these once raging waters, had become waterlogged and sunk, to be buried in the river bottom, and then the river itself had been drowned under red-hot lava, which had solidified into solid rock 50 feet thick, compressing the very river bed. It took us all morning to dig out that log. It was now black stone, perfectly marked. By the candlelight we examined it. "It is no tree that I know," said Mick, squinting. "Probably the species died out when the world was in convulsions. Do you know, Jack, strange birds have roosted on this prehistoric tree, quaint animals eaten its fruits and nuts and leaves, queer insects burrowed into its overcoat of bark. I'd give a lot for one glimpse of the world as this old tree must have seen it. If you'd lived in those days, Mick, you might now be petrified like this tree." "I'd be my own monument then," grinned Mick, "whereas now I'll merely blow away in dust." "What odds? None at all. Death is but a pause in life. My innards assure me it is dinner time, Jack. Come along to our camp and I'll put the billy on. Then I'll show you something." Mick showed me a wonderful little lizard, an ugly, ordinary, somewhat disdainful, sleepy lizard. But Mick lifted the lizard and placed it on a red cloth. Before our eyes, the lizard began to change slowly to a soft pink color that gradually spread into red. Then Mick took it outside onto the grass. Slowly the lizard changed to green. "No matter where you put it," said Mick enthusiastically, "it changes to just the color of the material on which it is placed. Humans cannot do that. If only we could, we wouldn't have to buy new suits of clothes. Just think of the saving in dresses to our lovely ladies. However, place our little change me coat upon flowers, and he takes the color of the flowers, really seems to absorb the color. If upon a piece of bark, then he becomes a piece of bark. He looks very ferocious, but he can't fight, which doesn't matter, for his enemies can't see him to gobble him up. It certainly is more curious than my dead timber and petrified log. Yes, Mick grinned, how have the mighty fallen? Size is not everything. In fact, sometimes I wonder if the littlest things prove to be the greatest after all. But this little lizard, by being alive, has its problems. How? The problem is how to keep alive. In this case, the worry is mine. I've been trying to feed him this week past, and only 3 days ago learnt he lives on ants. Have you ever tried to catch ants, Jack? Sufficient ants to feed a lizard with the appetite of a fat old pig. Of course I haven't. Well, I've been trying to satisfy this little tinker for 3 days past. Seemed it would be easier to catch a tiger than catch ants. But I've solved the problem, and Mick looked really proud. How? Grinning, Mick picked up the lizard and gently put it in a kerosene tin. He fastened down the lid. Hundreds of small holes were punched in the tin. Over these, Mick smeared jam. Now, he said, Billy's boiled. We'll have our feed, then come out and watch our little pet enjoy his feed. After lunch, we strolled outside the galley. The kerosene tin was black with ants. From inside out through the holes was shooting a tiny tongue. The ants were disappearing nearly fast as they came. I was getting real worried, said Mick. The little fellow was starving to death in the midst of plenty, but now he'll grow fat and I'll have a new mate. I laughed, and what does Jim think of his rival? Oh, Jim just thinks I've got lizards in the belfry, as well as bats. Oh, you're not too bad, Mick. I've known worse. But look here, there's something you haven't thought about. What's that? Well, are you going to keep your new mate boxed up all his life, a bachelor prisoner, pinning his little heart away? Thoughtfully, Mick scratched his grizzled chin. No, I hadn't thought of that. A quaint grin spread over his weather-beaten face. I'll have to do something about it. I'm responsible, yes, I think I see daylight. And he chuckled enthusiastically. I believe I can become godfather and all. Won't it be delightful to welcome the firstborn, the son and heir? But, he mused seriously, it's going to take a powerful lot of ants, when each of us few alluvial tin-scratchers, after weeks or months of toil, had dug and hauled to the surface a few loads of precious wash dirt. We'd combine in a community cleanup. We'd hire a horse and dray and cart each man's wash dirt down to a community sluice box by the creek. Here we would put through the dirt, run it through the sluice box, and separate tin from the wash dirt, the bottom gravels of the old river bed. We would simply do what nature, on a gigantic scale, had done. In the first place, nature had taken millions of years to wash this tin down into the river bed, concentrating it in patches here and there. We would concentrate our tin in 2 days' work, a few hours. Ah, but nature had washed away not only mountains, but mountain ranges, to gather her treasure deep within her bosom, while we would put through the same process but a few dray loads of wash dirt. One man would cart the dirt from the shafts down to the creek. Another man shoveled the dirt into the sluice box, with its rushing water forking out the washed stones and concentrating the material as the water swept the refuse away. Another would stream clean the tin free of the concentrates, that residue of heavy sands. Thus, with each one of us in teamwork concentrating on his job, we overcame labor, expense, transport, and other difficulties. It is wonderful what a few men can do when they work together with a common object. Our object was to make as good an independent living as possible and not work for a boss. We had no manpower except our own. To get a living, we had to produce more than our own labor was capable of doing. So we made water work for us. We harnessed running water into a long, narrow sluice box that was set with a fall, that is, with a certain slope. The confined water rushed down the box, and that rush of water was power. We shoveled the wash dirt into the head of the box, and the water rushed the useless material away, the heavier grains of tin gradually sinking as the water carried it more slowly down along the box. Long Stewart was the best boxman and streamer in the district. It was a pleasure to watch his expert work. Jim Bell was our boxman, though, and a good one, too. His was the job of working against the water, while allowing the water to do its work. His the job of throwing the tin concentrates back with a long-handled shovel to the head of the box, keeping the tin there while allowing the useless and lighter gravel to rush down out of the box tail. With practiced skill, a good boxman can hold almost every ounce of tin to the head of the box, while, as the day wears on, tons of useless gravel are washed away out of the tail of the box. It means skill and ceaseless hard work, in combination with accurately adjusted set of the box and the accurately measured consequent force of water. I believe that water properly harnessed is the greatest and cheapest labor servant of man. Even in our own tiny way, we could make water in one day put through all the wash dirt that it had taken us a month to dig with pick and shovel. As we came and went on our separate jobs on that so important clean-up day, we constantly cast an eye towards the head of the box and smiled thankfully if we saw the black streaks quickly gathering there, for this would be the first sign of the stream tin. Well before midday, the head of the box would be black with the concentrated tin grains, and Jim Bell, ceaselessly working in the box, kept every grain back to the box head as the eager water rushed the sands away. The concentrated tin, exactly like heavy black sand, would be shoveled into dishes. Finally, in a smaller box with a special shovel, it was streamed. The last grains of sand were washed from it. Swift, skillful, very heavy work this, working the heavy tin swiftly and ceaselessly against the water to clean it of every grain of heavy iron sands. It was then spread out on a tent fly on the ground to dry. Then we bagged it in little canvas tin bags. Each bag held 1 hundredweight, and each 1 hundredweight was then worth 7 pounds. That meant 140 a ton, thought to be a very good price then. When I think of that toil, with the knowledge that in coming years tin would rise to 200, 300, 400, 500, 700 a ton, happy were we when we cleaned up a few bags, for the money meant we were independent men, still our own masters. We would cart the bags of tin concentrates along the pretty road to Herberton for sale, and life was good. Chapter 10. Black Sands. Little Herberton appeared to be built higgledy-piggledy upon 7 hills within the encircling Herberton range. Gray and brown roads ambled through the town to meander unconcernedly up and down the hills. Out into the sunlight rose the roar of the stampers as the battery crushed tin ore. Right now a rich crushing from the rainbow. This new show was bringing a fortune to its finders, lucky devils. Each wet season that roar was drowned by the wild river as it foamed over its rocky bed round the town. In the dry season the river is pretty and deceptively peaceful, but its rushing waters are true to name when the mountain gullies tumble their brown floods down into its surging bed. Again and again would come rolling thunder from away back in the ranges. An extra big one seemed to come rumbling in from the newly found frog hole extended. Toilers out there were blasting away through solid rock in their restless search for tenstone, for Herberton itself was mainly a reef mining field, whereas Nigger Creek and the Deep Lead were alluvial. Reef tin, unlike the loose grains of stream tin in the gravels of old river beds, is part of the rock of the reef itself, which in turn is encased within the solid granite of hill and mountain. Hence, to break away the tinstone-bearing reef from the mother granite means shooting work, hammer and drill and explosives to tear the rocks apart. Then the broken reef rock is carted down to a steam power battery, where the battering rams of falling iron stampers crush it into fine sands. The tin is then separated from the worthless sands over inclined tables, really a sluice box over which water runs, just as we separated our stream tin from the old river gravels. The battery, of course, had its noisy steam arms to help, whereas we had but our humble manpower. So whether in river bed or in solid rock, man had to unravel the work of nature, to break free her tight clutch and rob her of her precious tin, which in the first place she had hidden so well, too dashed well, for me and many others. Poked away in almost inaccessible places over that sea of valleys and ranges, over 80,000 square miles of wild country, were the numerous mining camps. Long before you came to one such, either gold or tin or wolfram, you could tell if it were a reefing field, for floating with the wind over valley or hilltop would come the murmur, then the harsh roar of a stamper battery, echoing dully away to come again with a roar on a gust of wind, whereas an alluvial camp would be quiet. Herberton was put on the map by the prospectors Jack and Newell and their party, but the tin in the river was actually first seen by Jim Mulligan, and soon afterwards by a cattleman, that wonder man of the tableland, John Atherton. If any man in the far north was as good a bushman, pathfinder, and discoverer as Christy Palmerston, He certainly was John Atherton, as full of initiative, as cautious, as dogged, and as fearless, and in my humble opinion, more far-seeing, a man of broader national vision. Christie was a primitive man, a wizard with tough local problems, whereas John Atherton was more of the map-maker, and he certainly put the Atherton tableland, originally discovered by Mulligan, on the map. A large family of early-day Armidale people, the Athertons, trekked north into Queensland, where the baby brothers were to grow up and each make a name for himself, backed up to the hilt by their women folk. Australian pioneers did a mighty work and have received at least some recognition, but seldom a word is said about their women folk, who stuck to them through thick and thin. After the finding of the Palmer by Hahn and Mulligan, it was John Fraser, followed by Atherton, who pushed up into and among and over those untrodden ranges, with the first mob of cattle for the then starving miners, a wonderful feat repeated when Mulligan found the Hodgkinson. Apart from the bush, Atherton's passion was cattle and cattle country. He was ever seeking new cattle country. He found it away up in the tableland, in the wild bush, which where he would be called Mariba, making his way through open forest country road, the magnificent jungle scrubs discovered by Mulligan. One such scrub, in a few years' time, would be called Atherton, thus the Atherton tableland. What vast wealth of timber and produce of rich agricultural lands have since come from there, will always come from there, so far as we can tell, in his restless wanderings, ever seeking the wealth of cattle country. Again and again, Atherton rode over a wealth of mineral. Camped by a mountain stream, he wondered at the conspicuous black sands here and there piled against rocky bars, and later told others what he had seen. But ever he rode on, seeking pastoral country. On one return to the nearest civilization, which was in the vicinity of the newly discovered Hodgkinson goldfield, he rode up two prospectors working in that same creek, which they had called Tinaroo Creek. The horsemen reined up, noting with curiosity the two strangers so busily shoveling up those queer black sands. Willingly they straightened up to greet the horsemen. Visitors were rare indeed. They explained that this black sand was really stream tin, and valuable. Then they laughed at the realization that this big bearded fellow in corduroys and red shirt, smilingly toying with his horse's mane, was none other than that wandering cattleman who had first brought news of tin in this very creek. Atherton told them that back over those ranges, down past some big patches of scrub country, in a wild-looking river tumbling along between the mountain tops, there was plenty of that black sand piled up all over the place, where there's been a bit of a backwash from a flood. There's black sand in other creeks, too, but in that wild river, it's so thick that you can just shovel it up and bag it if you want to. Eagerly, but doubtfully, they questioned him. It seemed altogether too rich. Carefully they explained that there are a number of kinds of black sands. Black iron, for instance, magnetic iron sands too. tourmaline also. It all looks just the same black sand if you don't know it." The bushman dismounted and slowly ran the streamed tin from their box through his fingers in handfuls. "No," he finally declared, "it's the same black sand. I've handled it at times out of curiosity when I've gone to the creek to fill the billy. It's heavy like this. It is exactly like this. I see those little crystal shapes you show me, and these water-worn grains, and this pinky color on some of it too. No, there's no doubt about it. The black sand in that wild river is exactly the same as this black sand." John Newell organized a strong party of 7. Atherton was invited to share in any discovery, but resolutely declined. Good luck to them, but he was interested in cattle, and cattle country only. That quest took up all his time and interest, but he would guide them part of the way if they liked. The party set out to cross over into the ranges from Tinaroo. The country, but above all the natives, finally beat them. The nearer they pushed their way through to the locality where they thought that wild river must lie, the more numerous and menacing became the aboriginal inhabitants, and again the party had to slow down. When to advance farther meant to fight. The last thing Newell wanted to do was to antagonize the natives. Against such odds they probably would never have got back again anyway. Day and night, constantly, they had to guard their horses. Again and again they were forced to make long, rough detours to get round threatening tribes. They did reach the river, but the amount of tin they found was meager. Several years later, Newell, Jack, Brandon, Brown, and several others in a party tried again, and this time found their way down into that valley of the wild river. And one morning John Newell gazed down into a gully black with tin sands, and something at which they stared amazed, not believing their eyes, not believing the weight of stone in their hands. Weight! Why, some of those dull-looking slabs they could not even move, loose though many were. Then, from a solid reef in the solid rock, they saw more tin, solid tinstone. It was the first tin lode yet discovered in Australia. Hitherto, prospectors had sought and worked tin as grains of black sands in a mountain stream, but here it poked up out of the earth as solid rock within solid rock. No wonder they could not believe it. They broke it and crushed it and panned it off and weighed it and examined it for wondering hours, and still they could not be convinced. There was only one way to prove it: smelt some. How, in the wildest bush, when all they had with them was their ordinary rough camp gear? They hollowed out a stump as chimney of a forge and furnace, lined it with clay, and burnt good charcoal, wood for charcoal. Then they powdered a sample, mixed it with powdered charcoal as a flux, fashioned their own crucible, and made a bellows with the aid of a tomahawk, bark, and a few sticks. An old felt hat. Then, working up a roaring fire in the furnace, they actually smelted that sample, and poured it into a mold cut in the clay. When it was cold, they broke away the slag, and there was a shiny, silvery button of tin. But think of the ingenuity necessary to cause and control the heat necessary to melt tinstone ore. In wild excitement, John Newell saddled up and all alone rode night and day through hostile native country to Thornborough on the Hodgkinson. There he reported a find as exciting as a gold discovery to Warden Mowbray and applied for the reward claim. One of the richest tin discoveries in all Australia, right here near the Great Northern, whose battery was thundering out across the river as Mick and Jim and I brought our humble quota of tin into the sunlit township. It was warm now, but it would be pleasantly cool tonight, a climate that made us feel good to be alive, 3,000 feet up. Even then, the main street of the town was up and down a hill. As we strolled down the street in our town, shirts and strides, with boots on, too, it was with a wave and grin here and there. To brown, armed men, alert horsemen, borne to the saddle, townsfolk, in shirt sleeves, cheery of greeting, casually smoking blokes, with not a worry in the world, for at this period the price of tin was up. Rich crushings were coming from the Lucky Reefs, while new shows were being discovered. Out at Watsonville, too. That was in the days before we'd seen a motor car, the aeroplane, and high-explosive bombs, and super taxes. The youngsters all had rosy cheeks. The climate was vibrating with health. When you saw a dog fight in Herberton, it was a real fight. A dog bred in these districts, declared Mick, is a coward if he won't tackle a tiger. Keep your eyes off that young woman, Jim scowled. You've already used your allowance of postage stamps this month. Love will find a way, said Mick, grinning. Did you notice her red hair? That coppery shade tinged with fire always urges me to burst into rhyme. You'll burst in too, began Jim, and stopped staring. We glanced across at the pub. Leaning up against a post with hands deep in pockets, drooped a long, grizzled old man, 100 crow's feet round his eyes. Even from that distance we could tell they were snarly eyes, shadowed though they were under the rim of a battered old hat. He was staring expressionless towards us. Now, how in the name of the mighty Khan did he trail me here? Murmured Jim Bell. Who is he? Asked Mick as we strolled into Jack and Newell's store. The Moonshiner, answered Jim. The old man it was them took a pot shot at me out Wolfram Camp way before the sun was drowned. Looks like the old man is going to carry on the vendetta. Seems there's more dangerous pastimes than writing poetry to the gentle sex, said Mick. You'd better buy a few postage stamps. They're safer than buying bismuth. Buying hell, snapped Jim. Those new chums planted the bismuth in my claim, like I told you. You grinning old hyena, this is the Moonshiner. May he drink his own poison, the swine. A spice of danger, chuckled Mick, to relieve the peaceful monotony of Nigger Creek. Your friend holding up the post across the road there certainly doesn't look any lotus lily. Why not stroll across and oil his palms? He might shout you the beer of peace then. I'll have a piece of you in a moment, you splay-footed old skirt chaser, said Jim furiously. But Mick was obviously enjoying himself. Now don't lose your head, he chuckled. I see you've got one. Anyway, I thought you were bushman enough to have lost your charming friend. I felt sure I had, Jim frowned. I thought I lost him when I side-tracked from Wolfram chasing to railway navvying away across here, then slid aside into a backwash tin-scratching and let the line go on. You know what thought did, mused Mick. Yes, snapped Jim, and you're the result. Anyway, your snaky-eyed friend doesn't know where you're camped, said Mick unsympathetically. So why worry, Jimmy boy? You might be poked away in any camp within 100 miles of here, for all he knows. Besides, you're in the depths of civilization now. Look, there's the sergeant with a wary eye on us across there at the police station. Maybe the Moonshiner isn't the only one on your track. But Jim only frowned sourly.